Welcome to the Leading Owls podcast, brought to you by Rice University's Door Institute for New Leaders. Each week, we bring you inspiring stories and practical tips from successful student leaders, faculty, and staff, along with leadership experts and coaches that will help guide you in your own leadership journey. Welcome to our special series, Meet the Classified Campuses, where we spotlight some of the top higher education institutions leading the way in leader development. These remarkable schools have earned the prestigious Carnegie Elective Classification for Leadership for Public Purpose, a recognition of their outstanding commitment to developing future leaders dedicated to serving the public good. Each of these institutions has gone through a rigorous application process, demonstrating their deep dedication to leader development and public purpose. In this series, we'll hear from the campuses that were awarded their classification this past summer, exploring their innovative programs and the impact they are having on students. Today, we are thrilled to sit down with Dr. Matt Bowler, MBA Director, Watson Graduate School, and Dr. Josh Taylor, Director, the Hargis Leadership Institute from Oklahoma State University. OSU is at the forefront of leadership education with groundbreaking programs that are transforming the student experience. In this episode, they'll share their journey to achieving the Carnegie Classification, the strategies behind their leader development programs, and how they are shaping the leaders of tomorrow through their signature Cowboy Code. Welcome, Josh and Matt. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here.
Can you provide an overview of your campus's journey to achieving the Carnegie Elective Classification for Leadership for Public Purpose?
Sure, absolutely. The Hargis Leadership Institute is an office on Oklahoma State University's campus that's fairly new department for the university. Whenever we were first getting started, we knew that the Carnegie Elective Classification was coming in the future. And so one of our goals was how can we kind of use that process as a self-assessment and reflection on kind of where we are as a university. And so we had actually kind of met with the Door Institute where we've talked through things with some other nationwide colleagues. And so that's where we were in terms we knew this was something we wanted to do. We really wanted to use it as a way of assessing kind of where we were as a university. And so we had kind of buy-in from senior leadership at the university. And so then whenever the application became accessible, then we hired a faculty fellow. And this is where Matt Bowler comes in, and Matt's able to kind of guide us through this process.
So yeah, I came in, I wouldn't say midstream, but a little bit down the flow a little bit. Things were already kind of in process. The university, over the last 3 years, we have a new president who has a new strategic plan, and part of that strategic plan involved bringing in faculty fellows to propose and accomplish some strategic initiatives that were at the faculty level. I applied for the leadership faculty fellow, was able to develop some initiatives and was handed some of those. One of those was the Carnegie application, which Josh and I worked together on. He has a lot of the connections on the leadership side. I am a management faculty member. I teach leadership and run the MBA programs. So it was a fascinating journey into digging into everything leadership at OSU, from the budgets to the classes to the co-curricular, all the way out to having extension offices and 4-H programs as a land-grant institution. So it really was a journey of several months that you always wish you had started earlier, but it was a great journey and a great way to get to know everything leadership about our university.
That's so good to hear, because I know one of the goals and one of the reasons that so many institutions did it was to be able to give themselves a self-assessment, to look at everything that they're doing leadership-wise across their campuses.
Absolutely. And we're a mid-sized to large university. And so especially also as a land-grant university where we have extension offices, and it's a system to where we have campuses, not just our main campus, but also satellite campuses that are part of our system. And so, yes, it was a pretty daunting process in terms of looking at where is leadership development happening? And then how is that being measured? Where is it not being measured? Where are we doing a really great job of coordinating together? And then where are there gaps where we can do even more?
And with 8 colleges and 5 campuses, it's a lot, right? I mean, there are other universities as big as us that did it, but there's a lot of different people and personnel and nooks and crannies and offices that you have to get in contact with.
That is a lot. That is a Herculean task.
Yes.
What motivated your institution to pursue the classification?
As a land-grant university, part of our stated mission, and this is not unique to land grants, but really a big part of our culture is this leadership component of how do we give back to our state, to the broader community. And so that was the big piece for us, is we wanted to be able to evaluate and assess where are we making a real difference in terms of leadership development for our students, and how is that impacting the broader community.
Great. I love it. How does this classification align with your institution's mission and vision?
With our land grant strategy, and as you can tell, there has been a big focus on the land grant aspect of our mission and our new strategic plan. There were a number of key imperatives, and one of those was that we have ideal graduates, what an ideal graduate looks like, and that is that they're professional preparedness, engaged citizenship, ethical leadership, and personal responsibility. And I think that fits really nicely with what the Leadership for Public Purpose elective classification fits with. And so that was a big piece, I think, for us. And Josh can speak to that as well, having been on those committees earlier on that helped form those imperatives and form the strategy.
And we just love the way in which the classification is formed, where leadership has a direct responsibility to give back. And this leadership for public purpose, I appreciate the framing of it, that it wasn't leadership for personal gain, but it was leadership for a common good. That to us, I thought was a great way of even just helping us create common language across the university, which I can't say that we're perfect at, but we're still striving, but creating some common language, some common understanding of just when we're talking about leadership, this is the framework that we're really using. So I thought that was just a helpful way that, or maybe some helpful outcomes that came from the process for us.
I think one of the things that I found regarding the public purpose is that is something that permeates all of the colleges. So people think about leadership in a business school where I'm at, in the MBA program, and they think, well, it's for personal or financial gain, right? But really what I found, and I think is true of our business school as well as ag leadership or educational leadership across the university, was this ingrained culture of our leadership, whether it's business school, ag leadership, or wherever, is for serving the state, serving the people. And that even if it's a business purpose, it is still for the betterment of the state of Oklahoma, the people of Oklahoma, and the people of our region and the country. We mentioned the Cowboy Code in there as well. I mean, that's something we mentioned in our application.
I would like to hear about the Cowboy Code.
With our mascot being the cowboy, which was based on an actual real-life cowboy, a guy named Frank Pistol Pete Eaton, who was really a servant leader. So there are elements of the cowboy culture in the Cowboy Code that says we end the day knowing we gave it everything we had. We dream only as big as the sky. We know challenges come with pain, but pain will not win. We have a passion to do what's right, even when it's hard. We stand for what matters, even if we stand alone. We finish what we start. Being cowboys in our clothes, it's in our character. And so that is part of the code and culture of OSU. And so really that leadership aspect of it, it's trained into our students during orientation that this is who we are.
Yeah, that document's very much like a culture building document for the university. It's a way of expressing kind of institutional values. It just was natural for that to show up in the application. I thought Matt did a great job of including that in the application for us. And so maybe that would be an encouragement to other universities who are looking at this. Is there are probably some unique ways in which every university has these culture norming or culture building documents or experiences that are, I guess, unique to their DNA that they could include into this application that might really help explain or paint a broader picture of how leadership development is happening at that university. And so from our experience, we wouldn't shy away from some of those unique and probably very formative experiences for their students. And for us, that's a part of our application. This is Cowboy Code and how it is ingrained into kind of the DNA of how our programs operate, because it's just some of those values that we try to share.
I think that's such great advice. I think that helps your application come to life, gives it some humanity, gives it personality. Now I feel like I know what it's like at OSU more so than ever before. I mean, it just shows the kind of ideal student that you talked about, the kind of student that you're trying to create through your programs. What specific leader development programs or initiatives do you think contributed to your institution receiving the classification?
Some of the way that we're structured helps us quite a bit with this application. So the Hargis Leadership Institute is a centrally located leadership department that is able to work with a lot of the different units across campus. So we are purposefully structured where we're in academic affairs and student affairs. affairs. Because of that structure, then we have ability to partner with a lot of co-curricular programs. And so we offer a lot of programs that have no academic credit at all, entirely done outside the classroom. But we also have a lot of programs that are curricular in nature, and where that you can earn within, this isn't necessarily the Hargis Leadership Institute, but within agricultural leadership. They have a major and a minor. Inside of academic affairs, we have a certificate that's a credit bearing. And so I think that dual nature helps us quite a bit. I know that that's something that's fairly unique. A lot of times leadership departments are housed either inside of like a campus life department in student affairs, or they're housed in a business school or in college of education. So I think that structure helped us in some ways. I know that Matt has a lot of programs that he kind of saw and that were really influential. From our perspective, though, I think we have some co-curricular programs that are measuring leadership through. One of our programs is a partnership with the Center for Creative Leadership called Lead for Success. It's been very successful there, as well as I think we just have some scholarship programs that are really unique and helpful too, where we're able to work with cohorts of students from their very first days on campus all the way through graduation. And we see a lot of development that happens through the scholarship programs. So Matt, what were some of the programs that really stood out for you as you were compiling this application?
I think it's important to point out, Josh, his office is in the union. It's not in an academic college, right? So people see it as not part of one college or school or department, and it really does permeate across the university. I go back to what I was talking about earlier, the diversity of leadership programs that range from Josh's programs that are both curricular and co-curricular. We have some master's programs we just launched, and I think it was in the application that we had it in process and we're just waiting for approval from our regents, an innovative leadership graduate certificate that it can be embedded within the MBA, or somebody can come in and take that standalone as a certificate. But I think the far-reaching aspect of, if you look at our university and with our extension offices, we have an extension office in all 77 counties. Every one of those counties has a 4-H program. And when I started digging in and talking to the folks over in the ag school, they were explaining to me 4-H is a leadership program. And somebody over in the business school, I didn't even think about that, right? Then we have outreach programs through our Center for the Future of Work in the business school. Some of those are with specific companies, organizations. I did a 3-hour Zoom training with the Oklahoma Department of Health this morning on leadership. It's such a broad swath of leadership that all comes back to this idea of how do we build better leaders and people who are going to serve the people of the state of Oklahoma and build other leaders. So build leaders who are going to build leaders.
How do your leadership programs address the needs of a diverse student body?
One of the parts of this application for us, we were able to see pretty early on, like, okay, there are some strategic initiatives that we can try and execute. And so some of our process was actually launching a few of these different initiatives. And so they showed up in our application as these are just now starting, and they are starting because of our review process as a part of this application. And so Matt was able to work with the provost office and several other academic departments to create what we call a general education trail. That trail is a leadership trail where students can kind of create some meaning to their general education courses beyond just kind of isolated skills that they're developing. And so this leadership trail, I think, is a great way of whatever a student's interest is, they can kind of craft their general education courses to match those interests and to have a leadership component to them. So I think that's very helpful. Also, so much of what we do, and this I think showed up a lot in the application, but it's partnering with different programs and departments across our campus. And so we have a really great partnership with our Office of Multicultural Affairs to make sure it's the students who are coming from historically and traditionally marginalized racial backgrounds have the support and the skills that they need to have leadership opportunities, access, and be incredibly successful in their leadership endeavors on campus. We work with the Student Government Association and Campus Life with all the student organizations to make sure that those students have the leadership training that they need to be successful in those endeavors, as well as working then inside of the academic colleges. And some of the academic colleges are creating the leadership curriculum that's going to be high impact practices and dynamic programs for those students. And I would say that, yes, that's a challenge. I think it's going to be a challenge for every institution. And I also think it's one of the best reasons to go through this process is because you have to answer that question honestly to say, like, okay, so what are we doing for students? Are we just continuing a status quo, or Are we being innovative and really looking at what are the diverse needs of our student body? Are we actually providing those types of opportunities for our students? Knowing that different student groups are going to need different skills inside of leadership. And so, yeah, I thought that was one of the benefits for this process.
Well, one of the things I might add is that being in the state of Oklahoma, we have sort of a unique diversity issue in that we have 39 tribal nations in the state of Oklahoma. And so we are one of the largest percentage of populations of Native American students at OSU, and the university and the School of Business are currently working with the 39 nations in the state to work on both for-credit and non-credit educational opportunities, both workforce development as well as just general leadership education. And so that's been an ongoing effort over the last couple of years. That's something I think is sort of unique to our university and our state, and something that really has started to flourish over the last couple of years.
Absolutely. And I think also part of the way that we define leadership helps with this. We understand that there are barriers of access to leadership for a lot of students. And so trying to make sure that through this process, we are identifying some of those barriers and then coming up with strategies for how are we going to eliminate or help students overcome those barriers to access. And I think that's important for all of us leadership educators. So yes, what students are involved and how can we get those students more involved? But who's not present? Who is not at the table? Who is it that we can be bringing in? Make sure that we are, as best we can, eliminating any of those barriers to access. Because the student voice is incredibly important in leadership development and leadership education, but it's also important to make sure that that student voice is really representative of our entire student body, because leadership has historically not necessarily been completely represented.
What measurable impacts have you observed as a result of your leader development efforts?
Boy, it takes a lot of time. I mean, Matt put in hours and hours and hours trying to compile all of the data that we could.
Well, I think some of the measurable impacts that you see are, one, that you have more of your budget committed to leadership than you think about. 0.75% of the total budget of the Oklahoma State University is spent on leadership programs. That's a sizable amount when you think about all of the activities that the university does, from physical maintenance to salaries to everything else. That's a pretty good number. I think some measurable things that we saw are some of the things that it motivated us to launch and get in progress. One of the things that we found was that we could be doing a better job on the assessment piece. When I got in contact with our internal review folks that do our assessment, undergraduate assessment and things like that, it wasn't something that was assessed across the board. But if it's going to be part of our strategy and we're going to have this classification, then we need to be measuring that on the back end of how are we doing. And so I think the measurable is that it needs to be a measurable. We now are doing that. I think the ideal graduate, and Josh, fill in here for me on the way they're measuring those ideal graduates, which are sort of like checkbox requirements for graduation that students can work through as they work through their gen ed stuff. Josh, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as students are progressing and matriculating, part of it is that they have to build out a portfolio now. And a piece of that portfolio is their development of ethical leadership as a competency. And so that's great, because now we're able to see documents that they're producing or artifacts. And these are the ways in which they are, again, these are self-assessments, but it's ways in which they are perceiving their growth in ethical leadership. It helps us also to identify what are those high-impact practices where students are identifying. These are the things that really made a difference for me in terms of building that competency in ethical leadership. Some of the other things I would say that we've observed as results, I mentioned that our university has, and this isn't unique to us, but it is one of the things that we're proud of and is a big part of our leadership strategies, but we have these leadership scholarship programs. And so students, our high school seniors, are being offered scholarships for their demonstrated leadership ability in high school to come to OSU. And we have these scholarship programs where when they're here, they're in these cohorts and they're taking classes together, they're doing co-curricular programs together. And it's a way that they are continuing to invest in their leadership development, where we're building in those leadership competencies into their education. So I think those scholarship programs, those are ways that we really are seeing a big result. I'd say that the retention and graduation rates in those leadership scholarship programs is pretty remarkable. So we're usually in the mid-90s in terms of retention and graduation rates there, which I'm not surprised by that, but I think it's still significant to recognize that students who are engaging in leadership development, they're usually sticking around and graduating, which is a great thing for universities. The other thing that I think is really interesting that we've had in one of our assessments. So I know at the Door Institute, there's a big push for measuring leadership self-efficacy.
Yes.
So it's a self-assessment, yes, but it's a student's understanding of their confidence, their ability, their belief in themselves to lead, which is a direct line then to taking initiative, which is often one of the first steps in leadership, is taking the initiative to do something about it. And so one of the things that we see is that we measure self-efficacy, leadership self-efficacy right away for students. Most of the time, this is just in our scholarship programs, but it's in a lot of our leadership programs where it's in their first couple of weeks of class. For some students, actually, it's in their first day of class. And so they're measuring this leadership self-efficacy. One of the interesting pieces that we see is that when we reassess this at the end of their first year, that students have significantly lower scores in leadership self-efficacy after a year of pretty intentional leadership training, which at first was very disheartening. We're worried about okay, we thought this would be something that's increasing. The more we dug into data, though, the more we saw that it's probably a very healthy thing, that students come into the university thinking that they have leadership figured out, that they're really great at this and that they are going to be perfect. Then they have experiences at a large university where maybe they graduated high school with 30 people and now they're in a class of 5,000. And so there's a difference there. Maybe they came from a town that has 5,000 people and now we have a university that has 20 to 25,000 people. And there's just a difference in the way that you're going to learn and operate. Also, most of them came in as high school seniors with some accomplishments, and now you come in as a first-year student that maybe doesn't have that level of accomplishment. And so I thought that was interesting to be able to see, okay, so we start high. After this first year, we go low. We're interested to see, though, over the next few years, does that end up building back up? And our hypothesis is that it will, and that we're actually just increasing self-awareness in this process.
That is a really interesting finding. Very, very different, but it's just so fascinating to take a look at. And that's one of the great things about measurement is that you can really kind of dive into that data and see the progression and see how the program's impacts.
Absolutely. And it makes sense once we start to dig into it. But at first we were obviously worried.
It's sort of a boot camp model, right? You've got to kind of tear down that individual facade before you can start building them up as part of the culture and who they're going to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you share any success stories or testimonials from students who have benefited from any of your programs?
I have a couple that we're really proud of, and the students have done just incredible work. We had a few students who went on a leadership study abroad, and this was to actually study with one of our alumna. And so it's an OSU alum, and she's done incredible work. She's a world-renowned leader and humanitarian, and she grew up in rural Zimbabwe, and this alumna wasn't allowed to go to school whenever she was a young girl because she was a girl, and eventually teaches herself to read and write, ends up at Oklahoma State University for an undergrad master's, gets her PhD, and then goes back into rural Zimbabwe to make sure that every young girl in that area is able to go to school. So it's a really heartwarming and transformational story. So we take a study abroad to study with her, and our students are studying how do you go about creating social change as leaders. A really fabulous course. And when the students come back, their big question was, how do we continue to support the work of this alum who's really making this difference and these changes? And so the students have now started a legal 501c3 nonprofit institute organization that helps fund water wells in all of these rural schools. And so that's their, social change leadership model is, okay, we're going to help an indigenous or local leader make a difference in this community. So they work with her to fund water wells for these schools that beforehand did not have access to clean water. And that is changing the participation level for young girls in the area. It's actually creating access for those girls to be able to go to school. So that's, I think, a global impact that one of our leadership programs has had. But I think there's also some smaller ones. And I say smaller, there's some ones that are happening more on a local level that have also made a big difference. We've had students who really wanted to make a difference because of some leadership programs or leadership experiences they've had. And so they've started food pantries on our campus to make sure that students have access to food. We've also had students start what they're calling red pantries, but it's so that students have access to feminine hygiene products on campus. I mean, even things from, we have some students who want to be educators, and so they're partnering with the local alternative school, middle school, and junior high to have leadership education programs at those schools. So I think those are just some of the places where the fun part of leadership for public purpose is we get to say yes to students and kind of turn them loose to then go make a difference in their world. And so, I think there have been some really cool success stories that have come out of these programs.
Those are some incredible success stories, locally in Oklahoma to around the world. So those are incredible success stories. What advice would you give to other institutions aspiring to achieve the classification?
Start yesterday. Whatever day that is, whatever day you're listening to this, it should have been yesterday. No, I think it's get buy-in from senior leadership first, because then the next step is to go out and build a team and build that team and let them know that senior leadership has bought into this. Because I remember our first meeting, which was on Zoom, with all of the folks that we had brought out of the woodwork that do leadership in different areas, whether it be HR, the ag school, Josh's folks, business school folks. There was probably 25 or 30 people on that Zoom meeting. And our first job was to make sure that everybody understood this was something the university wanted and that we're going to need some effort from them, because it's real easy to let this get pushed to the bottom of their inbox. And I will say everybody in the university was great. Like after that meeting, so we had this first meeting that was kind of this orientation. And initially I thought, okay, we'll have more of these big meetings. But then one of my colleagues who was on that meeting, who does a lot of our not-for-credit outreach stuff, said, hey, what you need to do is now have small meetings with each of those small groups. Because otherwise, you've got a whole big group that is spending 90% of their time on a Zoom listening to something they don't care about. Then it was on us to have these individual meetings, go meet with people in offices, because we had people from the budget office, from curricular offices, from our assessment folks to our HR folks that all had to produce these reports. And we had to have them with enough lead time that we could then put them into our report and be able to tell a story that makes sense. And to me, no matter what your presentation is, whether it's in this report or it's a PowerPoint presentation, you got to be able to tell a story about what your mission and goal is and how these things fit together with that. Even though it's a fill in the blank sort of application, you still have to make that thing flow and make it make sense as the reader goes through it. So I think that was sort of the challenge is, first of all, where do you start, right? Like, how do you bite off on this big, huge thing? And it was, okay, let's get everybody together and then start tearing off pieces of it and approaching them individually. It helped that I had a fellowship that was primarily dedicated to go do this. That also showed dedication from central leadership as well.
What are your future goals for leader development at Oklahoma State?
Your turn, Josh.
There are a lot. Matt mentioned kind of a centralized assessment. That's going to be important for us to develop. But one of the things that we're really excited about, and this also comes down to like this process of faculty fellows and the way that we're able to like create some fellowships. We'll be starting a research center that's an undergraduate research center. So we know undergraduate research is a high impact practice. We know that this makes a big difference in learning outcomes for students. And so we'll be able to work with different faculty with like some mini grants and have them partnered with undergraduate students interested in research, and then they'll be able to develop leadership research. So we're excited for that. It'll be a partnership with faculty, with staff, and with undergraduate students. I'm sure graduate students actually will be involved in that as well. But that's something that we're really excited about and think that it'll make a difference, not just in terms of student leadership development, but also the broader field of leadership education and the importance of leadership education at a university setting.
How do you envision the role of higher education in developing leaders for public purpose in the future?
Something that I think is important is that Cowboy Compass General Education Trail is one of the things that's new and we're growing. And I think we're not the first institute to have these trails so that you can make sense out of your general education requirements. But we're doing it in such a way, especially with our leadership trail. I think one of the things we've talked about is serving Oklahoma, doing the things in Oklahoma for the people of Oklahoma. But we also want our students to have an international perspective. You get a lot of students at OSU, I think at any state university, many of them have never left the state and many who have certainly never left the United States. And so one of the aspects of that trail in the general education requirements is an international study abroad to fulfill that trail. And so we want people to serve in Oklahoma and serve the people of Oklahoma, but we want them to have an international perspective when they do that. I think continuing to grow our servant leadership mentality while at the same time growing our perspective while we do that is really important to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of gets to the heart of the purpose of higher education to begin with. Higher education was about developing the leaders of future generations. And that there was this sometimes like explicitly stated, other times implicitly implied concept that leadership is about serving the public good. And so I feel like there is this almost like ethical mandate that comes to higher education that says that we are going to effectively train leaders. For us as a university, I think that it's an exciting opportunity. I think that the classification creates an opportunity for leadership programs and even sometimes creates leverage for leadership programs to say that this is a part of our stated mission as a university. This is a part of what we say is important. And so now we need to make sure that we really do have the funds to back it up, the structure to support it, and then the overall like visibility that says that we are going to intentionally train leaders, something that often we say we're doing, but then we don't exactly know how we're doing it. And so now, no, we're going to have like a stated strategy for this is how we are training leaders. We're going to make a difference. And that leadership, again, I love that it's geared and oriented toward a public purpose and not just a private good. Yeah, this is a great opportunity for leadership educators to lean into why we do the work we do.
I was going to close out with a question for both of you to answer, which is we've talked about all the incredible programs that you've done and the application, all the work that went into it. As far as Oklahoma State is concerned, what is something about it that makes it special, that makes it different from other institutions?
Probably that Cowboy Code idea. Having in higher education, several different institutions, whether as a student, PhD student, faculty at different places, and working with other schools, I think that it's a true mentality. It's not just something we say or talk about. People help each other out. People want to help each other out. They want to help their communities out. We have a medical school here, and it's focused on rural health. It's not just focused on making doctors to be in the big city. It's reaching out to the communities in our state. That's really the mentality and the servant leadership for public purpose that comes across in, I wouldn't say everything we do, but a lot of the things that we do.
I very much agree with Matt in that it's even built into the overall structure as a land-grant university. It's this requirement to give back to the community. I would say that very much in the DNA of the university, there's an alignment with the classification for leadership public purpose, that leadership is about helping others, about finding a common good and giving back in some way. Yeah, I do think that makes, not that as land grant we're unique, there's a lot of those, but I think that that's a place where maybe for this application process, I do believe actually the Oklahoma State was the only land grant institution awarded. I think that's a place where there's an opportunity to expand for other universities. But in terms of being unique, this real desire to make sure that leadership is used to help others and create a common good.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We learned so much about the process that you guys went through, and congratulations on your success and being listed as one of the classified campuses. We wish you the best of luck with all of your future leader development programs. Thank you for joining us for the Leading Owls podcast. We will be back next week with more leadership journeys and tips to share. New episodes release each Wednesday. For more information on the Door Institute for New Leaders and our free leader development programs for Rice students, please visit door.rice.edu.